You thought you knew who blew up the plane in Lockerbie 30 some odd years ago that killed so many Americans. Well, there's new information that suggests somebody else may have been involved. And what about a guy who just got freed from prison after 38 years when it turned out the woman who identified him made up the story and was lying? You'll hear about this and other cases of miscarriages of justice on The Durst Show. This morning's news brings two stories that should shake your faith in our criminal justice system and also shake your faith in media reports about crimes. You all remember, certainly those of you who are old enough, the horrible tragedy that occurred just 32 years ago this week in Lockerbie, when an airplane carrying 270 or so people, the vast majority of them Americans, many of them Americans returning from vacation, and 25 or so of them students from Syracuse University who were returning from study abroad. It was blown up out of the air over Lockerbie, Scotland. Everybody was killed. 11 or so people were killed on the ground. It was the worst case of terrorism in British history and one of the worst cases of terrorism ever. And a man, of course, was eventually arrested after an extensive investigation. His name was al-Megrahi. And I, ironically, was retained by a British law firm to be an expert analyst of the evidence against al-Megrahi. The case was very, very, very speculative. The only real evidence pointing to this guy, we all knew that Libya was involved, and this guy worked with Libyan intelligence, but the only evidence pointing to this guy was the fact that they recovered the suitcase in which the bomb had been planted and remnants of the clothing, and the suitcase was traced to a shop in Cyprus where it was bought. And the owner of the shop identified al-Megrahi as the guy who bought the suitcase. I was asked as an expert in criminal law and forensics to do an evaluation of the evidence. The case was tried not in front of a jury, as usually is the case, but in front of a bunch of judges in Scotland. And he was convicted based on the evidence. And I did an analysis of the evidence, and I came away skeptical. I didn't say he didn't do it. I didn't say it was clear he was innocent. I said if you had to attach a percentage to it, and if you looked at all of the evidence, which consisted primarily of the eyewitness identification and his role in Libyan intelligence, you'd have to come away saying it was probably slightly less likely than not, maybe slightly more likely than not, surely not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the culprit, and surely not proof at all that he was the only culprit. And yet he was the only person ever charged. He was charged essentially with doing it himself. Again, everybody knew that Gaddafi, the leader of the Libyan government, was somehow involved, but it couldn't be tied directly to him. The Attorney General of the United States at the time, who was responsible for our phase in the investigation, was none other than the current Attorney General of the United States, Barr. He was then the Attorney General. Remember, he served twice. And he's now the Attorney General who, days before he will leave office, having retired, he will announce officially the indictment of this new person named Massoud, who now is being investigated based apparently on a confession, based on other much clearer evidence. Now, what we don't know is whether if Massoud is guilty, that means al-Megrahi is not guilty. It certainly is possible they're both guilty. But the new forthcoming indictment against Massoud may very well cast doubt on the conviction of al-Megrahi. Now, al-Megrahi's family is still appealing, even though he's dead. He served 8 years in prison, and then he was released on compassionate grounds because he was dying of cancer, and then he died shortly thereafter. But his family is still appealing, and his family is arguing that the investigation and likely indictment of this new person really does cast doubt upon the guilt of their relative. So we'll wait and see. But to just show you why you should have doubts about this, because of my involvement, I wasn't even a lawyer for the defendant. I was just an expert analyst of the evidence. And I came to my expert conclusion. The first time in my life I was ever canceled. They didn't even know the word at the time. I was canceled. I was scheduled to give a speech in Syracuse at a major synagogue. And as the result of me being involved in the investigation, the synagogue canceled me at the request of Syracuse University and people at Syracuse University, saying that I was there raising doubts about the guilt of the defendant. But all I was doing was looking for the truth. I was trying to help bring justice to the victims. I wanted to make sure, A, they had the right person, and B, even if they had the right person, there were other people involved. In my analysis, I said this could not have been carried out without the cooperation and instigation of the Libyan government. But yet I was canceled. I was canceled because I dared to challenge the accepted wisdom that al-Megrahi is not only guilty, but was the only person guilty, and the case was solved and it was over and justice had been accorded. A lot of victims' families didn't believe that. Some of them even praised me for my continuing the investigation. And Attorney General Barr wasn't sure that he was the only person involved. Just recently, at a memorial service for the victims, Barr said, as far as he was concerned, this is not a closed investigation. And so finally we may learn the truth. But I think the important thing, it's so important to understand that our criminal justice system is not perfect. It's far from perfect. It constantly has doubts, and constantly we should keep an open mind. And the media tends to report whatever the courts say, and the media didn't do its job. It didn't investigate as thoroughly as it might have whether other people were involved, whether this guy was guilty. My analysis, which was picked up by some of the British press, was not even picked up by the American press because they had their story. It was solid. They knew the services were conducted, memorials were conducted, tragically, funerals were conducted. It was over, and the truth was buried along with the victims. Now, finally, maybe we'll get to the real truth. We'll find out who was responsible for one of the worst and most horrible tragedies ever committed in the name of terrorism. You know, some people call terrorists freedom fighters. What kind of a freedom fighter would blow up a civilian airline carrying travelers and students, end the lives of young people in this way? And yet people glorify terrorists. People glorify terrorism. People say, well, you have to understand, if we were oppressed and we were treated this way, we would behave in the same. Come on. These are terrorists. These are people who deliberately target the softest targets, airlines, travelers, innocent people. So, A, let's not be sympathetic to terrorists. B, let's understand our criminal justice system is almost always a work in progress. And that just because the criminal justice system comes to a conclusion doesn't mean it's correct. History is the ultimate judge, and history never ends. And let's remember that the media and political correctness tell us, shut up, don't do anything, don't raise any questions. Why are you doing this? Why should we allow you to speak at Syracuse? If you have raised doubts about this man, we want this man to be guilty. Because if he's not guilty, we don't know who else is guilty. So beware of public pressure to convict people who may be innocent or may be guilty. The New York Times ran another story this morning about somebody who was definitely innocent. Convicted using false testimony. Michigan man is free after 38 years. This man, a young African-American man at the age of 25, was convicted of setting a fire, an arson fire, that killed an innocent person in a building. The evidence was clear against him. A woman, a mother of 2 children, came forward and testified. She saw him do it. We know women don't lie. We know eyewitnesses don't lie. How do we know that? The Me Too movement tells us that. The media tells us that. Why would you disbelieve a woman who came forward and testified that she saw this man? She was an eyewitness. She saw this man. Now, 38 years later, she admits she made up the whole story. There was no truth to it at all. She made it up completely because she was pressured to do so by people in her neighborhood who threatened her and said, if you don't testify that you saw this guy do it, we're going to hurt you, we're going to hurt your family. Whatever the reason, she testified falsely, knowingly, with malice aforethought, intentionally. She lied through her teeth and she remained silent while this guy spent 38 years in prison for a crime he had nothing to do with. Eventually, it was discovered that another man had burnt buildings down for arson for the owner of the building, and there seems to be clear evidence not only that this man who was 38 years in prison didn't do it, but who was the guilty person. Now, the woman who lied can't be prosecuted. The statute of limitations is well past. Also, maybe she was coerced. Maybe she was forced to do it. I don't think that's an excuse to convict an innocent person of a crime that he didn't commit. But again, where was the media? Where was law enforcement? It took students at the University of Michigan who spent years and years digging into the case, digging into the insurance claims, digging into the credibility of the witnesses, who finally came forward and proved this man's innocence. And now, 38 years later, he's freed. Where does he go to get those 38 years back? He's now an old man. He was a young man with dreams and ambitions, and he spent all this time in prison based on not mistaken eyewitness testimony. There's plenty of that out there, but a willfully false accusation by a woman who made it up out of whole cloth. If that sounds familiar to you, it certainly sounds familiar to me. I'm not being prosecuted for anything, but I have a woman who's made up a whole story out of whole cloth, never met me, and yet she swears she had sex with me 7 times, unprotected sex, with Leslie Wexner, with George Mitchell, with Bill Richardson, with Prince Andrew. She saw Bill Clinton on Jeffrey Epstein's island. She saw Al Gore on Jeffrey Epstein's island. Tipper Gore. Made up stories from top to bottom. And I'm being charged with defamation because I've called her a serial liar. Let me say it again. She's a serial liar. She makes up false stories for money about innocent people. She made up a false story about Alan Tipper Gore. She made up a false story about Bill Clinton. She made up a false story about me. She made up false stories about other people. Where's the media? Where are investigative reporters? Who's looking into this? The Telegraph in Britain has started looking into this a bit. But is there a single American newspaper? Is there a single American media? No. Netflix buys her story without telling anybody about her history of lying. The Miami Herald tells her story, suppressing the information about her history of lying. So don't be surprised. Do not trust the justice system or the media based on their biases and conclusions. Always think for yourself. Always look at the evidence. Sometimes you can't get the evidence because the media suppresses it. In my case, the media simply hasn't reported the fact that the woman admitted in emails that she never met me. She admitted in her manuscript she never met me. She told her best friend she never met me. She told the FBI she never met me. She told an investigative reporter back in 2011 who showed her pictures of prominent people. I was not among the ones that she met, even though she saw my picture in the show. All of that is true. No media reports it because they have their story. They have their story. It's a neat story. They have their story. Prominent lawyer accused. Well, why should we raise questions about that? Well, we have to raise questions. Not only about me, but about everybody who plausibly claims innocence, whether on death row or in prison. 38 years in prison is not the death penalty, but it's pretty bad. For some, it may even be worse. Fortunately, this man is now out. He had to leave the prison and go right into isolation because of COVID, but he will have years, hopefully, to live out his life. And will he get compensated? How do you compensate somebody for that? What's 38 years of life worth? He'll probably get compensated by the Michigan authorities. Certainly he will bring a claim, I would hope, to get compensated. The woman who falsely accused him probably doesn't have any money. But it's so important to keep an open mind. And those of you out there, and there are plenty, who say, criminal defense attorneys, what are you doing defending guilty people? Well, all these people were thought to be guilty. Lockerbie was thought to be guilty. Maybe he was. Maybe he is. I don't know. This man who served 38 years in prison, Walter Forbes, he was innocent. And yet a criminal defense lawyer who defended him would be pilloried in the press. Why are you defending a man who burned down a building and killed somebody? Oh my God, have you no compassion? Well, cases like this ought to make you appreciate the role of defense attorneys. Defense attorneys are skeptics. We're agnostics, not necessarily about God, but we are agnostics about the facts, about the media, about the law. And we have to be persuaded. We're from Missouri, the show me state. Show me, prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you can't, we're going to get an acquittal. Better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly confined. And if you don't understand that, talk to this 38-year prisoner, Walter Forbes, now a middle-aged man. If you don't understand why it may be better for an occasional guilty person to go free than for a man like this to have to serve 38 years in prison for something he didn't commit, then you have no sense of what our legal system is all about. So let's stick with better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly convicted. Let's stick with everybody deserving a zealous defense. Let's stick with a criminal case is never closed. It's never closed. The defense never rests. We always have to keep looking. I have a couple of cases now that are years and years and years old. I am still involved. I am still investigating. I have a woman who's in prison now in New York for a murder she may not have committed. I will not rest until there is definitive proof as to who killed this man and whether or not this woman was guilty of doing it. That's the job of the criminal defense lawyer, and that's the job of the media. And on the Durst Show, every so often, you're going to hear about miscarriages of justice. You're going to hear about cases in which everybody was sure they got the right guy and he was guilty. Everybody was sure. Shut the case down. We don't want to hear any more about it. Don't start raising questions. Why are you stirring the dust? What does it do to the victims? No, I'm not going to listen. And if you're tuned into the Durst Show, you're going to listen and you're going to hear cases whenever they come up. And if you know of such cases, let me know. I get emails every day from people claiming they're innocent. Probably most of them are not, but some of them are. And you're going to hear about those and other cases and other problems with our justice system on the Durst Show. Now it's time to hear from you, for you to fill in the wits from the Durst Show by your excellent, brilliant, and thoughtful questions. Our first call today is from Pedro.
My name is Pedro Schlisser and I'm calling from Portugal. My question is very simple and short. What happens in case President-elect gets sick or dies before he's inaugurated? Who will in that case become the next president of the United States? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question. I'm so glad we have listeners as far away as Portugal. Both the Constitution and statutes provide for what happens if a president dies after the Electoral College has voted. And at that point, the Presidential Succession Act comes into place, and the vice president-elect becomes president. If the vice president-elect were to die, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tempore of the Senate, and then the cabinet members. The real problem that our Constitution and laws don't deal with is what happens if a presidential candidate dies before the election or after Election Day, but before the electors meet. Those are questions that have not yet been definitively resolved, but we're now at a safe point. If, God forbid, President-elect Biden were to die, Vice President-elect Harris would become the President of the United States on January 20th. Let's turn now to our next caller.
Hey, Alan. I just wanted to say you are a titan in the legal industry, and you are someone I look up to, and I really appreciate your show and the positions you take. I don't always agree with you, but I think it's really interesting, and I'm glad to see you getting into YouTube. Keep it on, man. This is Mark from Colorado.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. I just disagree with your description of my job as being part of the legal industry. I mean, you're right. The law has become an industry, and it's become very profit-driven. I don't think of myself that way. I do half of my cases pro bono. I've never taken cases because of the money. The money is a side effect of the cases. I hope I take my cases to try to do justice. Some people disagree with the cases I take or with my definition of justice, because I see justice as a process, not as a result. And I will continue to represent people who are unpopular and who many out there think are guilty. And I very much appreciate your kind words about the Durst Show. Our next call is from Bob in Pennsylvania.
Hello, Professor Dershowitz. This is Bob from Pittsburgh. I was wondering if you considered contacting some of the larger customers who YouTube took down and offering to represent them. I think it would quickly turn into a class action suit. Somebody has to stop this insanity, and I don't think anybody could do it any better than you could. Great shows. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your confidence in me. I don't generally reach out to seek clients. When I started practicing law, that was actually illegal. It was called barratry. Now the law has changed, and you're entitled to seek out clients in kind of civil liberties, First Amendment type cases, but I still don't do it. If these folks wanted to call me and start a class action, I would certainly help them, because I do think that what any social media does in taking down voices of those that they disagree with or against the mainstream. The cases I talked about today were all against the mainstream. I don't know what YouTube would have done back in 1988 if I were on YouTube and I had a show and I said, that man who was convicted of killing those 270 people at Lockerbie may well be innocent. He may well be innocent. Would they have taken that down? It was deeply offensive to the victims, or at least some of the victims. And so you have to so much worry about who makes determinations of truth in a society based on the open marketplace of ideas, and it certainly shouldn't be the giant media. Our next call is from Massachusetts. Roger?
I've been alienated by a lot of the hard left of the Democratic Party, even though I'm a liberal myself. But I just can't. After seeing the Brandon Bernard case, if the Republicans hadn't been so hypocritical and had let Judge Garland become Justice Garland, then Merrick Garland probably would have agreed to take the case. And I think since you're a good lawyer, you would argue on the Supreme Court and be able to convince one of the conservative justices, maybe Roberts, to save Brandon's life. So, but now I really want Joe Biden to have his party control the Senate. So so he can have his Supreme Court justices go through. Thank you. And you have a great show.
Thanks. Great question. I had never thought about that the stealing of the seat from President Obama, the Merrick Garland seat, may have cost a human life. It may very well be true. If Garland had been on the Supreme Court, he might have voted for a stay. And if he had voted for a stay, even if we lost eventually in the Supreme Court, if he had voted for a stay and the execution had been postponed until after Joe Biden became president, I'm fairly confident that we could have gotten President Biden to commute the sentence to life imprisonment, because Biden has already said he opposes the death penalty. So the decision of the Senate to not allow the Merrick Garland nomination to go forward may very well have resulted unnecessarily in the death of somebody who was not guilty of a capital crime. What a brilliant insight by you. I appreciate it very much. Thanks. This is what I love about the listeners. They teach me things I didn't think about. I should have thought of it, but I didn't. And you thought of it, and thank you.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. I love the show. Thank you so much for doing it so often. I have two questions for you. Number one is Wade pulls down your video to sue them about Section 230. Why not just represent someone who's had their video pulled down for exactly that reason against YouTube? Why wait? Why make it only about your show? My second question is, I know you've talked about enfranchisement of voters and wanting as many people as possible to vote, but I've never really understood why everybody assumes that the more people who vote, the better. I mean, there are people out there who couldn't find America on a map if their life depended on it. There are people who think the earth is flat, who think the Holocaust never happened, who probably don't know what 5 times 5 is. Do we really want people who have no clue about anything voting in elections? I wonder if that's necessarily better than, some other model. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Great questions. The first question I've already answered. I don't usually reach out to people to help or encourage them to bring lawsuits. If they come to me, I certainly would respond positively to their request. In terms of your second question, you're really challenging democracy the way the founders challenged democracy. The founders of our Constitution were skeptical about democracy. They thought if you didn't own property, you didn't have a sufficient stake in the country to vote. They thought if you were black, you weren't real citizen of the country. If you were female, your job was to stay home and have babies, not to vote. By the way, you just heard me say, if you were a female, your job was to stay home and have babies. CNN might very well take that, put that on the air and say, Dershowitz said that if you're a female, you should stay home and have babies. Dershowitz said that. And they would play the clip and they would show Dershowitz saying females should stay home and have babies. Of course, that's not what I said. I said that's what the framer said. But that's exactly what CNN did to my Senate speech. They took words that I said, they put it on the air, and they said, I said a president can do anything as long as he wants to get reelected, leaving out the words illegal and unlawful. I said he couldn't do anything illegal or unlawful, but CNN cut it out. So I have to be so careful what I say even on this show, because CNN is out there doctoring tapes, doctoring videos, making up stories, putting it on the air, putting words in the mouths of people, which are exactly the opposite from what they said. I've ranted now. Okay, now back to your question. Look, my grandmother couldn't really read or write very well. She had come to America when she was 15 years old. She had limited knowledge. I think she knew what 5 times 5 was, but could she find Poland, where she came from, on a map? I don't know the answer to those questions, but she was brilliant and insightful and knew what was best for her and her people and her friends. So, even Thomas Jefferson, who was part of our original framers and didn't allow people without property to vote, said if you put a question to a philosopher or a plowman who couldn't vote in those days, you might get the better answer from the plowman. We've experimented over time with other ways of deciding who governs. We've put that power in elitists. We've put their power in platonic guardians. Our framers put the power to elect president in brilliant and distinguished electors. But I go with Winston Churchill, who said democracy may be the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried over time. So I want to see everybody vote. You don't have to know what 5 times 5 is to know that your family will benefit from health care. And you should vote for the candidate who supports health care for your family. So I'm for democracy. Let's turn now to our next question.
I feel like that if an employer decides they'd like to compel you to take a vaccine, they ought to take a step back and look at all the information we've been told for months and months about masks and social distancing. Right now, we understand the vaccines are 95% effective. Well, we've been told that both people wearing a mask and keeping 6-foot social distance is 100% effective. It seems to me like keep on doing the masks, and if you want to do the vaccine, it's your personal choice.
Well, I agree with you that if there were a vaccine that just helped prevent you from getting COVID, it would be a personal choice. But if it also protects others from you spreading it, I don't think it remains a personal choice. I agree with you. It has to be not only effective but safe. And we've heard some, reports. Somebody somewhere in the United States had an allergic reaction. She's okay, but she had an allergic reaction. And fortunately, she was near a hospital and was able to get an injection that prevented anything more serious from happening. A couple of people in England who had allergic conditions. So we're learning more, and we will learn more. Look, let's begin by giving the vaccine to people who want to take it. But eventually, if we really want herd protection, which requires about 70% vaccination, we may have to move toward compulsory vaccines. The issue of whether employers can improve the safety, increase the safety of the workplace by requiring all people who come to work to be vaccinated is an interesting question. I think the answer to that will be yes. The courts will find yes, subject to exceptions under the Americans with Disabilities Act and perhaps religious exemptions, though I don't buy in the religious exemptions. The chief rabbi of Israel today announced that he was going to urge rabbis all over the world to urge their congregants to get vaccinated. That not only is there nothing in Jewish law that prohibits vaccinations, that Jewish law affirmatively mandates that you take life-saving measures and measures that help save the lives of innocent people. So look, this is going to be a great debate in the weeks and months to come about compulsory vaccination, about how safe the vaccine is, and I think we ought to go with science. This morning, Vice President Pence was vaccinated on television to show and demonstrate its safety. He said he didn't even feel it. And I hope it turns out this is safe and that every American wants the vaccine. I hope the issue is how do we get the vaccine to people who want it as quickly as possible rather than dealing with that percentage of people, either anti-vaxxers or skeptics, who refuse to accept the vaccine. I hope we don't have to reach that issue. I hope we really have enough vaccine to at least start giving it to everybody who wants it. Our next call is from Tony in Arizona.
Hi, Professor. This is Tony calling from Arizona. And you continue to say, hey, Google, take down my YouTube channel, my episode. I know the real reason why you're doing this. You're wanting to get more clicks. You're just trying to clickbait us and to go into your video stream to find out what's going on. Actually, I didn't know you had a YouTube channel, but that's just a joke. I do appreciate the show and keep up the good work. Hope everything's going well.
Thanks, Tony. Of course, I'd love if more people clicked on and more people subscribed. I'd like more people to watch this show. But I'm certainly challenging YouTube because I have long believed that nobody should be able to get the benefit of exemption from the law if they serve not as a platform, but as a publisher that picks and chooses. So I have a principled reason for challenging YouTube. But yeah, sure, if it results in more people watching The Der Show, that's an added benefit. So please, if you're tuning into The Der Show to follow my challenge, by all means, do it and tell your friends and subscribe. The more people watch it, the happier I become. So thanks for your comment. Let's turn now to our final call for the day.
My name is Jeremy. I'm from Ottawa, Canada. And the other day on your show, you had a challenge for finding any legitimate religious reasons that are based in religious texts for not wanting to get a vaccine. And I can think of two. I was raised in an evangelical household, and there's two that come to mind. The first one would be the ethics of the way that the vaccine is developed. That could be a real problem. For example, if there was a vaccine, not saying this one in particular, but a vaccine that was developed using embryonic stem cells from aborted fetuses. For Christians that are considered themselves to be pro-life, this could be a very serious issue. Who interpret the Bible to be against abortion, that could be a very significant issue. And the second would be for some of the more conspiratorial Christians who might believe that the vaccine is the mark of the beast, as decided in Revelation. It talks about having the mark of the beast, and without it, you wouldn't be able to engage in commerce. So naturally, with a vaccine, that might be required to be able to go into stores. That's been the thought of many Christians, is that it could be the mark of the beast. Anyway, so that's just a couple of religious objections that are based in religious texts that I can think of. And thank you so much for your show. I love it. Keep up the great work, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for citing those biblical sources. Let's turn to the first one first. What if fetuses or other remnants of human beings or human fetuses were used? Let me turn the question back on you. What if Mengele, the horrible butcher of Auschwitz, who did the most horrible things, experimented on children and babies and killed people, what if in the course of his experiments he discovered the cure for cancer? Would we say, no, you can't cure cancer by using the product of horrible, unethical, illegal, immoral experiments? I think in the end we would say, no, if these children died and were murdered, they didn't die in vain. We don't give Mengele the Nobel Prize, but we surely do use the cancer-curing drug that he may have discovered. Look, he didn't. All of his experiments were nonsense and horrible, and he probably used the experiments just as a cover to kill children because that's what he wanted to do. He was a vicious and virulent anti-Semite. Tragically, he was never caught, and he just died. He drowned swimming somewhere in South America. But so I don't think that the Bible would necessarily prohibit life-saving medical procedures, even if they were developed in a way that was antithetical to the Bible. And as far as the mark of the beast, you could say anything is. I remember Jerry Falwell, who I liked, once calling me the Antichrist on the Geraldo Rivera show. He said, the Antichrist is alive. He's a man. He's a teacher at Harvard. And, you can call anybody the Antichrist. You can call anybody the mark of the beast. I think if you look at the core of religion, love thy neighbor as thyself, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, as the Hebrew Bible puts it, and the Christian Bible puts it similarly in its language. Be good to strangers, be good to your neighbors, choose life. Those are all very specific, explicit commands that you always choose life and choose health and choose helping your neighbors. And I think that's the true message of religion, as Rabbi David Lau, the chief rabbi of Israel, has been telling people not only in Israel but around the world. And I think he speaks not only for the Jewish religion, but for most other mainstream religions. So I hope that if people have religious objections, they'll go to their priests, their ministers, their rabbis. They'll look at the Bible themselves. They'll read the core messages of the Bible, and they'll understand that there's nothing in religion that prohibits the taking of measures, medical measures, that not only save your lives and the lives of your family, but the lives of strangers. Let's continue to have this debate. The vaccine is going to become an even more prominent use, and the Durst Show will be show central for ethical, moral, and legal discussions about the pandemic and about the virus, just as it has been central to the election, challenges to the election, false accusations, all of this and more on The Durst Show in future days. And please call me with questions and comments and criticisms that you have of me and the show. The number is 216-710-0050. 216-710-0050. Call me. I really want to hear what you have to say. You provide the wits that completes the Durst Show wits.